"Put your hands on her again," the man in the black suit said quietly, "and they'll never find the hand." The entire lobby went still. 20 armed men, a hostage situation unraveling at the seams, and somehow every single one of them was looking at her. Claire Donovan hadn't come here to be noticed. She'd come in out of the rain. And now the most dangerous man in Chicago had just made her his personal business. If you've been with us from the beginning, thank you. If you're new here, welcome. Drop your city in the comments below so I can see how far this story has traveled, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single moment of what happens next. The rain had been coming down since 6. Not the soft, forgiving kind of rain that made Chicago feel romantic in the movies. The kind that came sideways off the lake and found every gap in your collar, every crack in your shoes. The kind that made you feel like the city itself was trying to push you back inside. Claire had been on her feet for 14 hours. Her scrubs were damp under her coat. Her shoulders ached in the specific bone-deep way that only came from too many hours of standing at a trauma bay, holding a life together with both hands, while everything around you tried to fall apart. She just wanted to get home. She saw the hotel awning half a block ahead, the kind of place that had a name in gold lettering and a doorman who pretended not to notice when you weren't the type of guest they were expecting. She told herself she'd duck in just long enough for the worst of the squall to pass. 5 minutes. 10 at most. She pushed through the revolving door at 9:47 p.m. By 9:49, everything had changed. She heard it before she saw it. That particular silence that doesn't happen naturally, the kind that falls over a room when everyone in it has just realized they might not walk out. 1 second the lobby was full of the low hum of a Wednesday evening, a pianist running through something soft near the bar. Heels clicking on marble, the gentle percussion of a city hotel at work. Then the side doors blew open. 4 men came through the service entrance on the east wall. 2 more through the main doors behind. The pianist stopped mid-phrase. The bartender's hand disappeared under the counter and then reappeared immediately, slowly palms out, when one of the newcomers swung toward him with something that was not a question. Claire didn't run. She didn't scream. Her body did what 14 years of training had built into it without her permission. She dropped 3 inches, shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, and started counting. 6 visible. Probably 2 more she couldn't see yet. The man nearest the revolving door was covering exits. The one heading for the front desk was the one who mattered. He was moving with purpose, which meant he had an objective, which meant this wasn't random. The elderly man beside her navy blazer hearing aids moving slowly hadn't processed what was happening yet. Claire put one hand on his elbow, steered him left toward the shadow of a support column, and kept her voice at almost nothing. "Sir, come with me. Don't look at them." He came. People usually did when your voice carried that particular frequency, the one that wasn't asking. She pressed him into the column's shadow and kept her eyes moving. The man at the front desk had a gun out now. The desk clerk, young female frozen in the way people froze when the brain couldn't reconcile what the eyes were seeing, had her hands up. The other guests in the lobby had compressed themselves against the far wall near the elevator bank. A tight cluster of expensive coats and very bad decisions in the making. 3 of them looked like they were going to bolt for the stairs. Claire could see exactly how that ended, and it wasn't well. She was doing the math without thinking about it. Exits. Angles. Distances. How many steps from her current position to the elderly man's position to the door marked "Fire Stairwell" in red on the north wall? She was building the diagram in her head, the way she'd built 1,000 of them. Triage wasn't just for bodies, it was for situations, and the first question was always the same: what can be saved, and in what order? She didn't notice the man watching her until he spoke. "I was standing in this corridor that led to the hotel's restaurant, set back from the lobby proper, partially behind the architectural pillar that separated the lounge from the main floor." She hadn't counted him among the 6 because he was completely still, and in a room full of movement and fierce stillness was its own kind of camouflage. I was watching her the way you watch something you're trying to figure out. Not the way men usually watched her. Not with the evaluating look she'd learned to ignore in hospitals and bars, and the 100 spaces where a woman moving alone draws a certain kind of attention. This was different. This was the look of someone who recognized a thing they hadn't expected to see. She clocked him in her peripheral vision and didn't look directly at him. Dark suit. No tie. He wasn't moving toward the exits, wasn't panicking, wasn't reaching for a phone. His hands were at his sides. His breathing, she could tell from across the room, was even. She filed him away and kept moving through the diagram in her head. The man at the front desk had said something to the clerk. She was shaking now, pulling at the keyboard, and Claire recognized the shape of what was being demanded, even without hearing the words, access to something. Guest information, or the back office, or both. The second man, the one covering the room, was drifting. He was supposed to be watching the cluster of guests near the elevator bank, but his attention kept getting pulled toward the front door. Amateur mistake. It meant his training was incomplete, which meant he was dangerous in a different way, unpredictable rather than disciplined. Claire started calculating the angle. She wasn't going to do anything stupid. She wasn't going to play hero. She was going to move the elderly gentleman to the stairwell door and get him out, and then she was going to get herself out, and she was going to do it in the 6-second window when the drifting guard's attention was toward the front door and the desk operative was occupied. She had done harder things under worse conditions. She gave it 4 seconds, watching the rhythm of the drifting guard's attention. There it was, as he turned toward the front. She touched the elderly man's sleeve. On 3, we're going to walk normally toward that red sign on the north wall. Don't rush. Don't look at anyone. Just walk with me like we're heading to a conference room. Can you do that? The old man looked at her. His eyes were clear. Whatever fear he'd felt had been replaced by something more useful when she'd taken charge of him. Yes, he whispered. Good. 1, 2. The drifting guard turned back. She stopped. Held. Let the moment pass. The guard's gaze swept the room and caught her not as a threat, just as part of the furniture, which was what she wanted. His eyes moved on. She felt the elderly man's hand grip her forearm. Tighter than she expected for someone his age. 3, she said. They moved. She walked him the 17 steps to the stairwell door, without looking at anyone, without changing her pace, without doing anything that might read as wrong. She felt the guard's attention, like a physical weight sweeping the room behind her, and she held everything inside her. Absolutely level breathing, steady shoulders, loose. The way she'd held herself walking between tents in places where the wrong kind of attention was the last kind you wanted. She got him to the door, pressed it open 6 inches, warm stairwell air. Straight up, she told him. 3rd floor. Find a room with people in it and stay there. He looked at her. What about you? I'm right behind you. She was not right behind him, because when she turned back, the drifting guard had gotten less interested in the front door and more interested in the cluster of guests near the elevator bank. And one of those guests, a young woman in a hotel uniform, who was probably an employee caught on a bathroom break rather than a guest at all, was starting to cry in that particular compressed, suffocated way that sometimes preceded something louder. Something that would change the temperature of the entire room. Claire moved before the calculation finished. She crossed the lobby in 10 steps, put herself between the young woman and the guard's line of sight, and said in the absolutely ordinary voice of someone explaining something boring, Hey, look at me. What's your name? The young woman looked up. Anya. Anya. Good. Listen to me. I need you to breathe through your nose. In for 4, out for 4. Can you do that right now? Anya breathed. The sob compressed itself back down. The guard looked at them. Claire met his eyes with the same calm she'd used on a dozen overwrought relatives in a dozen waiting rooms. The look that said, this is handled. There's nothing to see here. You can keep moving. He kept moving. Claire let out a breath so small it barely counted. The man at the front desk had finished with the clerk. He was gesturing now toward the back corridor, moving the clerk with him, which was not a good development because people who got moved to back corridors in situations like this had a statistically worse time than people who stayed in the lobby. Claire took a half step toward them without knowing she was doing it. Don't. The voice was right behind her. Low, not loud. She went very still. The man from the corridor was standing 2 feet to her left. Up close, he was taller than she'd calculated. Dark eyes, the kind of face that had a lot of country in it, not in a way you could point to, just in the sense that it had been lived in, shaped by things that weren't comfortable. He looked like a man who had made 1,000 decisions in rooms like this one and had stopped losing sleep over them some years back. He was also, she noticed, not particularly scared. "They won't hurt her," he said, still quiet, still even. "They're after information, not people. She'll be back at that desk in 8 minutes. Claire looked at him. "You know what they want." It wasn't a question. He looked back at her with something that might under different circumstances have been respect. "I know a great many things that would be inconvenient to explain right now." "Are they here for you?" A pause. "Fractional. Adjacent to me." She processed that. "Then they might decide people become useful when information doesn't appear fast enough." He looked at her differently then, like he'd asked himself a question about her and just gotten an answer he didn't expect. "You're not a hotel guest," he said. "No. And you're not a civilian, not the way you've been moving." She didn't answer. His eyes moved to her hands, then back to her face. Something shifted behind his expression, not surprise exactly, more like confirmation. "There are 2 more in the kitchen," he said, "and a driver outside on the north side. They came prepared for resistance. They didn't come prepared for—" He glanced at her with something that was almost dry. "A variable." Claire looked at the front desk. The clerk and the operative had disappeared through the back corridor. The drifting guard had tightened up, consolidating toward the center of the lobby. "Someone needs to go after her," Claire said. "Someone does," he agreed. "And you're going to do what exactly?" He looked at her. She had the distinct impression that not many people asked him that question in that tone. "What I do," he said, "is make a phone call, and in approximately 4 minutes, this situation resolves itself." 4 minutes is a long time. "It is," he said. "Which is why I'd prefer you stayed close to me and stopped moving toward men with guns." She looked at him steadily. "I was getting Anya calm before she got us all killed." Another fractional pause. "Her name is Anya," he said half to himself. "She told me." I was quiet for a moment. Then he took out his phone, unhurried like a man checking a dinner reservation, and made a call that lasted exactly 11 seconds. He said 4 words she couldn't parse and hung up. The next 4 minutes were the longest of her recent life. She stood near the column, watching the room, doing the constant work of the diagram update, recalculate, adjust. Anya had gotten herself under control and was now sitting on the floor near the wall with 2 other guests, which was tactically better than standing. The cluster near the elevator bank had stopped threatening to bolt. The guards had a rhythm now, which was worse in some ways and better in others, worse because they were more attentive, better because rhythm was predictable. The man with the phone stood beside her and said almost nothing. Once when the guard near the door shifted position, he put a hand briefly on her arm. "Just pressure, just wait." And she registered without surprise that she didn't shake it off. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the side door opened again. Different men, this time. 4 of them moving with the particular economy of people who knew the exact dimensions of what they were walking into. No raised voices. No theatrical aggression. Just the quiet, competent work of a situation being taken apart at its seams. In 90 seconds, it was over. The original 6 were no longer a problem. The clerk emerged from the back corridor rattled, but physically intact, exactly as he'd predicted. The cluster near the elevator bank started breathing again. Someone's phone, finally released from the paralysis of fear, began to ring with a ringtone that was absurdly cheerful, given the previous 4 minutes. Claire didn't move. She was running the aftermath, the way she always did. Checking faces for shock. Checking posture for injuries. Her eyes doing automatic triage of everyone in her visual range. Old habit. She couldn't turn it off. "The older gentleman, you moved to the stairwell," the man said beside her. "You came back." "He was fine," she said. "He didn't need me." "But the others did." She looked at him. "Are you making a point?" "I'm making an observation." He studied her face. "You had a clean exit, and you didn't take it." "Neither did you." His mouth moved in something that was technically a smile. "I had reasons to stay." "So did I." You don't even know these people. That's not a criterion I've ever found particularly useful, she said. I was quiet for a moment. Around them, the lobby was beginning to reassemble itself, the particular human process of deciding that the extraordinary thing had ended, and ordinary things were permitted to resume. Someone righted a fallen chair. The bartender reappeared. Anya was on her feet being spoken to by one of the new arrivals, nodding with that over-controlled steadiness of someone holding themselves together out of pure will. "What's your name?" he asked. She almost didn't answer. Old reflex. "Claire," she said. "Damien." He didn't offer a last name. She didn't ask. "Claire," he said, and the way he said it had a quality she couldn't immediately categorize, like he was putting it somewhere, filing it in a place he didn't use for most things. "How long have you been out?" She looked at him sharply. He met her eyes without flinching. "You read the room like you've read rooms under worse conditions. You moved the civilian without announcing yourself. You assessed threat vectors before most people in here understood there was a threat." He paused. "I'm not guessing." She was quiet for 3 seconds. 4 years, she said. "Army." That's a more complicated answer than the question implies. He looked at her like he knew exactly what that meant. One of his men appeared at his shoulder, the sort of man whose job it was to appear at shoulders and whose face communicated professionally that there was something requiring attention. Damien didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Claire. "I'd like to continue this conversation somewhere that isn't a crime scene," he said. "I have to be at work at 6 a.m. I'll have you home before midnight." She studied him. She was exceptionally good at reading people. It was one of the things the army had developed in her that she'd never found a way to put down, and what she read in Damien Russo was not what she'd expected. She'd expected the aggressive self-certainty of a man who controlled things. She'd expected performance. She'd expected the particular energy of someone who wanted her to understand his power before anything else. Instead, she found something quieter. Something that had she suspected been made very sharp by a great deal of pressure. "You're going to tell me what they were actually after," she said. "Among other things," he said. "And you're going to tell me why they're adjacent to you." "That," he said, "is a longer conversation." "I have until midnight," she said. He looked at her for a moment, that same look she'd caught in the lobby when she'd been moving through the diagram and he'd been watching from the corridor. The look of someone recalibrating. Then he nodded once and turned, and she followed him toward the corridor, and behind them, the lobby continued, putting itself back together, and nobody, not one person in that room made a single move to stop her, or question her, or suggest she might want to reconsider, because they'd seen what she'd done, and they'd seen what Damien Russo did when someone questioned a choice he'd made. He'd looked at the man who'd reached for Claire's arm, the guard who'd thought she needed to be controlled. He'd said 2 words. "Touch her." He hadn't finished the sentence. He hadn't needed to. The guard had taken 3 steps back and found somewhere else to be, and the lobby had understood something in that moment that nobody said out loud, but everyone filed away. This woman, whoever she was, whatever she'd come here out of the rain to escape, had just become something other than a stranger. In Damien Russo's world, that meant something very specific. It meant she was protected. It meant she was dangerous. And it meant that whatever came next, whatever had been set in motion in that lobby on that rainy Wednesday evening, was not going to be simple or safe or anything like the quiet life she'd been trying to build. She walked through the corridor beside him and didn't look back. She'd learned that particular discipline a long time ago. You never looked back at the room you'd just pulled someone out of. You just moved forward and trusted that the ground would hold. The car was quiet, in the way that expensive things were quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the deliberate suppression of it. Rain against the windows. The city sliding past. And Damien Russo sitting 18 inches away from her, watching the road ahead, with the patience of a man who had learned that silence was a tool. Claire had been in enough high-pressure situations to know when she was being given space to fill. She didn't fill it. She looked at her hands in her lap instead. Still steady. They were always steady. That was the thing she'd trained out of herself so thoroughly that she sometimes forgot. It hadn't been natural. 14 years of teaching her body to hold still when everything inside was moving. "You're not going to ask me questions," he said. "Not a question. I'm waiting for you to tell me what you want to tell me." "Most people don't wait. Most people haven't spent 4 years interviewing frightened soldiers," she said. "You learn to let people get there on their own." He looked at her then. Really looked the way he'd looked in the lobby, that calibrating attention, like he was adjusting something internal to account for her. "The men tonight," he said. "They work for a man named Victor Kane. He runs the east side of the city the way a landlord runs a building he's decided to sell. He's extracting everything he can before he moves on. Tonight was a message. To you. To me." He paused. They weren't there to take anything from the hotel. The clerk's computer had access to a guest registry, a specific guest. "You, a business associate of mine who was staying on the 7th floor." He said it without drama, without the self-importance that most men used when explaining their own significance. Just information offered plainly. Victor wanted to know who was in town. He wanted to know who I'd been talking to. The hotel was a data point. "And the violence was decoration," he said. "Victor enjoys decoration." She absorbed that. "So they'll come back." "They always come back," he said. "The question is, what shape they come back in." The car stopped. She hadn't been tracking where they were going, another old habit suspended for a moment by the conversation, and she looked up to find they were outside a building that was not a restaurant and not a hotel, and not anywhere she could identify as a location where she was supposed to feel comfortable. She looked at him. "My offices," he said. "I have a kitchen. I was told you haven't eaten since this morning." She stared at him. "You were told. I had someone check the hospital's schedule." He said it the way other people said I looked it up online, with the complete absence of embarrassment that came from never having been in a situation where that particular capability required justification. "You came off a 14-hour shift. You ducked into my hotel in the rain because you were too tired to walk another 4 blocks to the parking structure." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I want you to understand," she said carefully, "that most people would find that deeply alarming." "And you?" She thought about it honestly. "I'm reserving judgment." Something moved behind his eyes that might in a different man have been amusement. They went inside. His offices were on the 14th floor, and they were not what she expected, not because they were lavish, but because they were functional in a way that suggested actual work happened here. Papers, actual physical papers on a desk that had been used hard. A whiteboard with columns of numbers she didn't try to read. Books that looked opened, not decorative. A man standing near the window who straightened when they entered, and whose expression went through 3 distinct calculations in about a second and a half when his eyes landed on her. "Sal," Damien said. "Get her something to eat." Sal, shorter than Damien, broader, with the kind of face that had been rearranged by life in ways it hadn't fully recovered from, looked at Claire with the focused attention of someone whose entire job was knowing who was supposed to be in a room and who wasn't. "Who is she?" he asked. Not rude, just direct. "Her name is Claire," Damien said. She pulled an elderly guest to cover and kept 3 people from panicking badly enough to get themselves shot. Then she talked a young woman down from a breakdown while a guard was 4 feet away. Sal looked at her longer. "What do you do?" "ER nurse," she said. "Huh." He processed this with the particular neutrality of a man deciding whether to file something under interesting or concerning. He apparently went with interesting because he moved toward what she assumed was the kitchen without further objection. Damien sat at the desk. He didn't posture about it, didn't spread himself to take up space the way men who needed to signal authority usually did. He just sat down and looked at her with the direct, unperformed attention that she was beginning to identify as simply how he operated. "I want to ask you something," he said. "You're going to anyway." "Your file," he said. "The one the hospital has. The reference it lists for your last position before nursing school, the number is real. The agency it connects to isn't a hospital." The room didn't change. The air didn't change. Claire kept her face exactly where it was. "You ran my file," she said. "I ran your name. The file ran itself." He leaned back slightly. "I'm not going to pretend I didn't look. I think you'd find it more concerning if I hadn't. What I find concerning, she said evenly, is that you think having access to federal-level employment records is a casual thing to mention over dinner. I think, he said, that you already knew I wasn't an ordinary man when you chose to get in the car. She held his eyes. He was right, and they both knew it, and the only question left was whether she was going to perform offense or skip to the part where they actually talked. She sat down. What do you want to know? She said. Nothing you don't want to tell me. He said it simply. I brought it up because I want you to know I'm not operating blind. Not about you. I'd rather you know what I know than have you surprised by it later. Later implies there's going to be a later. There's going to be a later, he said. Not arrogant. Just certain in the way that people who had correctly predicted enough outcomes became certain. Victor isn't going to stop because tonight failed. And you were there tonight. Which means he may already know you exist. The sentence landed the way he'd probably intended it to, not as a threat, but as a fact delivered without softening, because softening it would have been its own kind of condescension. Sal reappeared with a plate. She didn't look at it. She was looking at Damien. You're telling me I'm a liability, she said. I'm telling you you may have become one without choosing to. And your solution to that is what exactly keep me in your orbit so you can manage the exposure. My solution, he said, is to be honest with you. What you do with that is your decision. Sal set the plate down near her. She glanced at it. Real food, not the kind you got from a building with a concierge, but the kind someone had actually cooked, simple and warm and smelling like someone's grandmother's kitchen. She looked it up at Sal. Did you make this? He looked mildly offended. My wife made it. She sends food with me because she thinks I don't eat. Do you? Not usually. He pulled a chair to the side of the room and sat in it with the settled permanence of a man who had been in this particular room for many years. You want to tell me who she is? This was aimed at Damien. She was at the hotel, Damien said. I know she was at the hotel. Angelo told me what she did at the hotel. Sal looked at Claire with something that had moved from evaluation to something warmer and less comfortable. He said you walked a man out of a hostage situation like you were showing him to his table. He was scared, she said. People who are scared need a direction. I gave him one. And the girl, the one who was going to cry, same principle. She picked up a fork. Fear is loud. If you can give it somewhere to go that isn't noise, it usually goes there. Sal was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My daughter-in-law is a nurse. Is she? Good one. Works a lot of nights. He paused. She doesn't walk through hostage situations on the way home, though. First time for everything, Claire said. Sal looked at Damien. Something passed between them that Claire couldn't fully read, some long-established shorthand of two people who had been in each other's company through things that created that kind of language. Then Sal nodded once minimally and looked back at his phone. She ate. Damien watched her in the way he watched most things, not rudely, just steadily, with the quality of attention that she suspected he applied to most problems. She found somewhat to her own irritation that she didn't mind it. Tell me about Victor Kane, she said. You want to know your exposure. I want to know what I walked into. She looked up. You said he already knows I exist. How quickly does that become a problem? Damien was quiet for a moment. Not evasive thinking. Victor collects information the way other people collect leverage. If he knows you were at the hotel and you interfered with his operation, he'll want to understand you before he decides what you are. Threat or asset? Or irrelevance? Which would be the best outcome? And the odds on irrelevance? Another pause. Lower than I'd like. She set down the fork. Because of what's in my file. Because of what's in your file, he confirmed. She looked at the table for a moment. The thing she had spent 4 years building, the ordinary life, the scrubs and the night shifts, and the apartment where nobody knew her last name before this one was sitting in the room with them like a third person, and she was doing the math on how much of it was still standing. What did the file say? She asked. Specifically. Specifically, he said. It said that for a period of approximately 30 months, a combat nurse operating under a field designation attached to a joint task force operating in 3 theaters was credited with keeping a unit's mortality rate at roughly 40% below the theater average. He paused. And that the same nurse was present for 6 operations that don't have public designations. The room was very quiet. "That's not a nurse," Sal said from his chair. "That's what the file says," Damien said. His eyes were on Claire. "I'm not asking you to confirm it. I'm telling you that if I found that in 40 minutes, Victor can find it in a day and a half." She picked up the fork again, ate another bite, made herself chew, swallow, breathe. "Then I have a day and a half," she said. "To do what? To figure out what I'm going to do about it." He watched her. "You're not going to run." "I'm terrible at running," she said. "I tried it for 4 years. It's exhausting." Something moved in his face, not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one. Then the door opened. The man who came through it was not Sal-shaped, not the careful, measured entry of someone who belonged in the room. He moved fast, and he was holding his left side, and when the light caught his face, Claire saw it immediately. The pallor, the jaw set against pain, the shallow breathing that meant the normal breath was costing too much. "Marco." Damien was on his feet. "It's handled," Marco said. And the way he said it's handled was the way people said things when they were using words to stop other words from happening. "Took a graze on the way out. It's fine." It was not fine. Claire was already moving. She crossed the room before anyone had finished processing what was happening. She got to Marco, put one hand on his shoulder to stop his forward motion, and said, "Sit down," in the voice. He stopped. People always stopped. "I don't need." "Sit down," she said again. Same tone. Not louder, just cleaner. He sat. She got her hand to his side, not asking permission, just working the way she worked efficiently and without drama, the way she'd worked in places where there wasn't time for introductions. She assessed through his shirt before she moved it aside, and what she found when she did was not a graze. "This isn't a graze," she said. "It didn't come all the way through," Marco said, which was not the same thing. "No," she said. "It didn't, which means it's still in there." She looked up at Damien. "I need a kit. First aid at minimum, surgical if you have it. Clean cloth, light source, something to work with." Damien had already said something to Sal, who had already left the room. The machinery of this place was very efficient, she noted in the disconnected part of her brain that was still observing instead of purely acting. "I'm fine," Marco said. "You have a fragment in your lateral oblique that is 3 inches from your renal artery," she said. "You're fine right now. That's a temporary condition." Marco looked at Damien. "Who is she?" "She's saving your life," Damien said. "Let her." She worked. Sal came back with a kit that was substantially better than minimum. Someone in this organization had clearly thought about the possibility of needing more than bandages, which told her something about the reality of what these people navigated. She worked by the light Sal held, and she talked Marco through it without stopping. Not the comforting chatter that some nurses used, but the steady informational running commentary that she'd found worked better on people who needed to feel like they had some control. "This is going to pinch. Deep breath. You're doing fine. Almost there." Marco was, she discovered, a man who had been through enough that he didn't perform stoicism. He just actually had it, which was rarer and easier to work with. Damien stood to her right the entire time, not hovering, not anxious in the way of men who needed reassurance. Just present in the way she'd noticed him being present in the lobby, fully attending, fully still. Once she needed a second pair of hands to hold a position, and she said, "Here," and put Damien's hand exactly where she needed it, without looking up, and he held it without question, without comment, with the exact pressure she'd indicated, and she registered that somewhere in the portion of her brain that wasn't focused on the fragment she was currently working around. When it was done, Marco was as stable as he was going to be, without an OR, which was stable enough for tonight, if he didn't move, and didn't do anything that qualified as activity. "You need a hospital," she said. "Not tonight," Marco said. "Tomorrow morning." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Morning." She met his eyes until he understood she wasn't negotiating. "I mean it. What I just did buys you time, not resolution. You understand the difference." "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I understand." She straightened. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. Damien was looking at her. She looked back. "How many times," he said quietly, "have you done that?" "Which part?" "All of it. The fragment, the conditions." He glanced at the kid, at Marco, back at her. "How many times have you done that in a room like this?" She thought about the honest answer. "More times than I can remember with a specific room," she said. "The work is the same wherever you do it." Howe was quiet. Then he said, "You told me you wanted a normal life." "I told you I left the army 4 years ago." "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not." Sal made a sound that wasn't quite a cough and wasn't quite a laugh. Marco, despite everything, was watching them both with the detached amusement of a man who had known Damien Russo for a long time and was apparently finding the current situation unprecedented. "She's not going to disappear," Marco said to Damien. "I can tell. She's got that thing." "What thing?" Claire said. "The thing where you look at a problem and you don't look away from it." He shifted slightly, caught himself, went still again at Claire's warning look. "Damien's got it too. It's how I can tell he's going to try to make this your problem permanently." "Marco," Damien said, "I'm just saying." "You've been shot." "Grazed," Marco said with tremendous dignity, and Claire felt something pull at the corner of her mouth despite everything. Damien looked at her. In the light of the office with Marco stabilized and the crisis receded to its corner, he looked like what she suspected he actually was, a man who had been running hard for a very long time and had built enough competence around himself that most people never saw how hard the running actually was. "I owe you," he said. "You don't," she said. "He needed help. I helped him." "That's not how debt works in my world." "I'm not in your world." "You were in my hotel," he said. "You helped my people, whether you chose to be in my world or not." He paused. "You've got a foot in it now." She held his eyes. "I want it very clearly understood," she said, "that I make my own decisions about where I go, what I do, and who I help." "Understood," he said, without hesitation, without the reflexive pushback she'd half expected. She picked up her coat from where she'd dropped it when she'd started working on Marco. "I have to be at work at 6. I'll have a car take you. I can get a cab. At this hour from this neighborhood after the night you've had," he said, "you'll take the car." She looked at him. He looked back. Neither of them was going to win this one on argument. They both probably knew that, so she picked the battle that mattered. "Fine," she said. "The car." She was almost to the door when he said her name. "Claire." She stopped. Didn't turn all the way. Just enough. "Victor knows about tonight," Damien said. "He'll know by morning who else was in that lobby. I want you to be careful." She stood in the doorway for a moment. "I've been careful for 4 years," she said. "It mostly works." She left without looking back. In the car on the way home, she stared at the city going past, and she let herself feel for exactly the length of a red light on Michigan Avenue, the full weight of what the evening had been. The lobby. The elderly man. Anya and her compressed, suffocated crying. Marco and the fragment that wasn't a graze. Damien's hands holding exactly where she'd put them with exactly the pressure she'd asked for without a single question. The light changed. She put the weight back where she kept it and looked at the road ahead. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it. The text said, "We know what you are. We know what you did. Be very careful who you stand next to Claire. Some people are worth dying for. He isn't." She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the seat and looked out the window. Victor Kane, she thought, apparently moved faster than a day and a half. She didn't sleep. She told herself she would changed out of the scrubs-made tea. She didn't drink, sat on the edge of her bed, and looked at the wall. The way she'd looked at walls in a dozen different countries when the shift was over, but the body hadn't gotten the message yet. The text sat on her phone like something with weight. She hadn't deleted it. She hadn't responded to it. She'd screenshotted it and set the phone face down on the nightstand, and then spent 3 hours cataloging every decision she'd made in the last 6 hours and whether any of them could be unmade. None of them could. That was the thing about the kind of nights that changed things. You didn't get to decide afterward that you hadn't been there. The elderly man had been moved. Marco's fragment had been removed. Damien Russo had her first name and apparently already had everything else, and Victor Kane had her phone number and apparently had everything he needed to use it. She was in it. The only question was how deep and in which direction. At 4:30, she stopped pretending about the sleep and made coffee and stood at her kitchen window and thought about the text. "We know what you are, not who what." That was specific. That was someone telling her they'd accessed the same layer of her file that Damien had accessed, or a layer deeper, and they wanted her to know it. The message wasn't a threat exactly. It was an invitation to be afraid. She'd been afraid before. She knew what it felt like, and she knew what it was for, and she knew that the only thing fear was useful for was information. It told you where the real danger was, and then you used that information, and then you moved. She got to the hospital at 5:58. By 6:15, she was in the middle of a multi-vehicle accident intake, and the text had moved to the part of her brain where she put things that needed processing later, which was a part of her brain that had a great deal of material in it and very good organizational systems. She worked. She was good at working. She was better at working than she was at almost anything else, which had been true for so long that she'd stopped thinking of it as compensation and started thinking of it as just who she was. She moved through the trauma bay with the economy of motion that came from years of doing the same work in spaces that were substantially less forgiving than this one. And the residents who worked alongside her had learned in the way residents learned things that when Claire Donovan moved a certain way, you stepped aside and handed her what she asked for and didn't ask questions. At 11:14, she looked up from a chart and found Damien Russo standing at the ER entrance. He wasn't announcing himself. He was just there in the way he'd been in the hotel corridor, completely still, not performing the act of waiting, just existing in the space with a patience that most people didn't have. He was in a different suit from the night before. He looked like he hadn't slept either, but he looked like a man who had decided not to sleep and was at peace with the decision, rather than a man who had lost the fight against wakefulness. She handed the chart to the resident beside her. "Give me 10 minutes, she said, and the resident nodded in the focused way of someone who had learned not to ask. She met Damien near the door away from the desk. "You got the text," he said. Not a question. "Last night. How did you know?" "Because he sent one to Sal this morning," he said. "Victor's telling us he's made you. He wants us to know he's made you." "So it's a message to you," she said. "Not just to me. It's both." His eyes moved to her face with that steady attention she was starting to recognize as simply how he processed things completely without looking away from the parts that were uncomfortable. "He's telling me that anyone I bring close becomes a target. He's telling you that you've already been categorized." "As what?" "As mine," Damien said. The word sat between them for a moment. "I'm not yours," she said. "I know that," he said. "Victor doesn't particularly care about the distinction." She looked at him. "What do you need from me?" "I need to know how much Victor knows about what's in your file," he said. "Not the surface is what I found. I need to know if there are operational details that could be used to locate people you served with, identify missions that have civilian implications, or create leverage over anyone currently active." She held his eyes. He was asking something that required a specific kind of trust, and he knew it, and he was asking it directly, instead of sideways, which she credited him for. "Why?" she said. "Because if Victor has operational details, he's not using them just against you. He's building a package, something he can sell or deploy." He paused. "I need to know what's in the package." She thought for 3 seconds. "I need to make a call," she said. "Who to?" "Someone who can tell me what's been accessed and from where." She looked at him steadily. "Do you have a problem with me making that call?" "No," he said, without hesitation. "Make the call." She made the call on her break, standing in the stairwell with the door closed, the way she'd made calls in 100 stairwells and 100 supply corridors and every other marginal space that was technically private. The number rang 4 times before it picked up, which meant the person on the other end had seen the caller ID and was deciding. Claire. The voice was female flat and carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who worked a job that didn't have hours. I was wondering when you'd call. Someone accessed my file, Claire said. The deep layer, not the surface. I know. How long have you known? 3 days. A pause. It was a sophisticated pull, not a hack and authorized access through a contractor channel that shouldn't have had clearance. We've been tracing it. Victor Kane, Claire said. Silence on the other end. A different kind of silence than before, the kind that meant something was being recalibrated. Where did you get that name? The voice said. I've been having an interesting week, Claire said. What did he access? Your field designation, your theater assignments, your unit attachments. Another pause, and this one was heavy. And the operation designations for 4 of the 6 black ops you were attached to. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. Which 4? She said. The voice told her. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, then opened them. One of those operations has 3 people currently undercover, she said. Active. I know, the voice said quietly. Claire, we're working on it. But if this information gets to anyone who can parse what it means. I understand what it means, she said. I'll handle my end. Your end, the voice said, and the exhaustion had shifted into something sharper. What exactly is your end, Claire? Because our monitoring shows you're currently in a hospital in Chicago, and you spent last night in the office building of Damien Russo. Your monitoring shows that fast. When someone accesses a flagged file, we watch everything adjacent to it. The voice paused. He's not someone you should be adjacent to. He's not what you think he is, Claire said, and then caught herself because she wasn't sure why she'd said it, and the voice on the other end apparently caught it too. Claire. I know, she said. I'll be careful. Being careful is not. I know, she said again. I'll call you tonight. She hung up. She stood in the stairwell for 30 seconds and did the math that the call had just made necessary. 4 operation designations. 3 active undercover personnel. Victor Kane had the designations, and if he had anyone with the right background to decode what those designations meant, what they implied about personnel, about timing, about the specific nature of the infiltration. Then, 3 people she had never met, but who had worked the same wars she had worked, were in a different kind of danger than they'd been in this morning. She went back to the ER and finished her shift. At 3 p.m., she met Damien in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital, because meeting at his office 2 nights in a row felt like a pattern she should interrupt, and she wasn't ready to have this conversation at her own apartment. She told him what she'd told the voice, the 4 designations, the 3 active personnel, the nature of the exposure. She watched him take it in. He didn't perform the act of processing, he just processed, which meant she watched his face go very still and his eyes track something internal for about 15 seconds, and then he came back. He's not going to use it immediately, Damien said. How do you know? Because Victor doesn't use leverage when he gets it. He holds it. He turned his coffee cup once on the saucer. He's been building something for 8 months. This is another piece. He won't deploy it until the picture is complete. You don't know that for certain. I know Victor Kane for 15 years, he said. I know how he builds. He's patient in the way that people are patient when they enjoy the anticipation as much as the result. His jaw tightened fractionally. The 3 active personnel, they need to be moved. Can your contact do that? She's working on it. How fast can she move? Faster if she has a reason to prioritize. What makes her prioritize? Confirmed threat rather than theoretical exposure, Claire said. If I can give her something concrete, something that tells her Kane is actively planning to deploy the information rather than hold it, she can escalate. I can give you something concrete, Damien said. She looked at him. Victor reached out to me this morning, he said. Not through intermediaries, directly. He sent me a meeting request. He paused. He wants to talk about an arrangement, his word. He's going to offer you a deal using my file as the leverage, she said. That's my reading. And you're going to? I'm going to take the meeting, he said. And I need you to understand why, because I don't want you to hear it secondhand and make a decision without the full picture. She looked at him steadily. I'm listening. If I don't take the meeting, Victor escalates immediately. If I take it, I can see exactly what he has, how much of it he understands, and what he intends to do with it, which gives us a window. He held her eyes. I want to be completely clear with you. I am going to this meeting to get information that protects you and 3 people I've never met. Not to make a deal with him. Not to negotiate a peace. To find out what he knows. And then what? And then, Damien said, we take apart what he's building. The coffee shop was warm and ordinary around them. A table of college students, an older couple sharing a newspaper. The particular ambient peace of a Thursday afternoon that had no idea what kind of conversation was happening in its corner. Claire looked at Damien across the small table and thought about what she was actually looking at. A man who had made decisions in rooms, like the ones she'd made decisions in only his rooms, were different, and his tools were different, and the weight he was carrying around them was structured differently. But the way he stayed level, when things tipped the way he thought before he spoke, the way he looked at what was actually in front of him, rather than what he wished was in front of him, that she recognized. I want to be there, she said. No, not at the meeting. I'm not stupid. But I want to be close enough that if something comes out of that meeting that requires immediate action, I can take it. He looked at her for a long moment. You mean if he deploys before the meeting ends? If Victor Kane is who you say he is, she said, then he's not meeting with you to negotiate. He's meeting with you to demonstrate. He's going to show you what he has. And if showing you doesn't get the result he wants, he moves immediately. She held his eyes. I want to be close enough to respond. To respond, Damien said. Meaning what exactly? Meaning my contact can push the relocation order through in under 2 hours, if I'm standing in front of something concrete, she said. But she needs me available, and she needs the confirmation fast. He was quiet. Then he said, You'd be putting yourself in his line of sight. I'm already in his line of sight. He texted me last night to tell me so. There's a difference between being in someone's awareness and being physically proximate to Damien. She said his name the way she said things when she needed someone to stop talking and hear her. He stopped. I know the difference. I've navigated the difference in a lot of places. Let me make the call on my own safety. He looked at her. Something moved in his face, not capitulation, something more considered than that. He was actually thinking about what she'd said, actually running it, rather than defaulting to the protective response. You stay 2 blocks away, he said finally. In a car. With Sal. With Sal, she said. He'll argue with you, Damien said. He argues with everyone. That's fine, she said. I argue back. He looked at her with that fractional ancestral smile expression. I know, he said. The meeting was set for the following evening. She spent the rest of Thursday and all of Friday morning working her hospital shifts, moving through the clean and knowable work of the ER, and in the background, she ran everything she knew about Victor Kane through every framework she had for understanding how people built power and why. She called her contact twice. The relocation process for the 3 active personnel was moving, but slowly bureaucracy didn't accelerate well under pressure, which was one of the reasons she had left the world that ran on bureaucracy. Friday afternoon, Sal picked her up from outside the hospital in a car that was aggressively ordinary, which she appreciated. He drove in silence for about 4 minutes. Then he said, You know he doesn't do this. Do what? Explain himself. Sal kept his eyes on the road. To anyone. Ever. What he told you in the coffee shop yesterday, the part about why he was taking the meeting, the full picture, Damien doesn't do that. She looked at the side of his face. How long have you known him? 22 years, Sal said. Since he was 23 and I was 30, and we were both in a situation that was substantially worse than last Wednesday. A pause. He makes decisions. He doesn't explain them. He doesn't make the case for himself. He did that to you because... He stopped. Because she said. Because he didn't want you to think he was using you. Sal said it simply without drama. That's the only reason Damien Russo explains himself, when he doesn't want someone to think he's using them. He paused again. He has explained himself to me twice in 22 years. Both times it mattered a lot. She was quiet. I'm not trying to run a play on you, Sal said. I'm telling you a fact. You can do what you want with it. I know, she said. The car stopped a block from the address Sal had given her, and she understood without being told that this was where she was staying. She could see the building from here, the kind of place Victor Kane apparently liked, which told her something about his self-image. Sal cut the engine. He'll come out in an hour, Sal said. Maybe less. And if he doesn't, Sal looked at her. Then we'll know something went wrong. And we do what then? He reached into the glove compartment and took out a phone. You call your contact and tell her it's concrete, he said. And I make a different kind of call. She took the phone. They sat in the car and waited, and the city moved around them, and somewhere in the building ahead of them, Damien Russo was sitting across from Victor Kane and learning the shape of exactly how much danger the next hours contained. Her contact's number was already pulled up on the phone. Her thumb was near the screen. At 47 minutes, her own phone buzzed. Unknown number. Different from before. The text said, Ask your friend how many of his own people he's buried. Ask him what he does to the ones who stop being useful. Then ask yourself if you really know what you walked into. She read it. Then she looked up at the building. And she thought Victor Kane is watching this car. Which meant Victor Kane knew she was here. Which meant the meeting hadn't gone the way Damien expected. She looked at Sal. Call him, she said. Sal already had his phone out. He was already dialing. She watched his face as it rang the 4 seconds before the call connected, 4 seconds in which Sal's expression did a thing she hadn't seen it do before, which was move from professional calm toward something older and less controlled. The call picked up. Damien's voice. Level. But underneath it, something that wasn't quite level. There's a problem, he said. There's a problem, Damien said, and the way he said it told her everything the words didn't. Not panic. Damien Russo didn't panic, she'd already understood that about him. But there was a compression in his voice, the sound of a man who had walked into a room expecting one thing and found the walls were different than he'd mapped them. Are you hurt? She said. No. Where are you? Still in the building, 3rd floor. Victor excused himself 10 minutes ago and hasn't come back. A pause, tight and controlled. He left 3 of his men in the room with me. They're not threatening. They're just present, which is its own kind of message. Sal had the car running. He was looking at her. He's holding you, she said. He's demonstrating, Damien said. There's a difference apparently. He made that distinction himself before he left. The dry edge in his voice was faint, but she caught it. He told me he wanted me to have time to think. He said thinking was something I didn't do enough of before I made attachments. Attachments. That word was aimed at her, and they both knew it. He knows I'm in the car, she said. He told me you were here before I had a chance to mention it. He said, a brief pause. He said it was touching that I'd brought someone to watch over me. She looked at the building. What does he actually want? He wants me to withdraw support from the Kellerman deal. It's a port contract. Logistics imports the kind of infrastructure that lets you move things without questions. His voice was even, but she could hear him choosing words carefully, which meant there were ears in the room beyond his own. If I pull out, he inherits the contract. He told me that's all he wants. And what does he get with the contract? She said. Everything he needs to finish what he's building. A beat. Claire, he doesn't just have your file. He has the files of 6 other people connected to me. Lawyers. A city council member. A federal prosecutor who has been working a case against Kane's operation for 14 months. She went very still. He's been building this for years, she said, long before he started moving on my territory. Damien's voice dropped slightly, just enough that she understood the men in the room weren't hearing this part clearly. The port contract is the last piece. With it, he controls enough legitimate infrastructure that his operation becomes nearly impossible to prosecute. He doesn't need to hide anymore. He just needs to be too useful to touch. She looked at Sal. Sal was listening to her half of the conversation with the focused expression of a man translating rapidly. "He's not going to let you leave until you agree," she said. "That's my reading. And if you agree." The pause that followed was very short, but she felt the weight of it. Then a federal prosecutor loses the evidence that took 14 months to build. 3 undercover personnel get exposed, and Victor Kane becomes the kind of problem that doesn't have a solution that fits inside the law. He said it flatly, without drama, just the actual shape of what it was. "I'm not going to agree." "Damien, I'm not going to agree," he said again. Quiet, absolute. "But I need about 45 minutes before this becomes something that can't be managed quietly. Can you get me 45 minutes? She looked at the building. She looked at Sal. She ran the diagram, the one her brain built automatically in situations with too many moving parts, and what she saw when she ran it was not comfortable, but it was clear. "What's on the 4th floor?" she said. A pause. "Why?" "Because Victor left the room and went somewhere. If he's waiting for your answer, he's waiting somewhere in the building. And if he's in this building, he has something here he doesn't want to leave." She was already thinking. "The files, the compiled package. He wouldn't keep that off-site right before a meeting where he was going to use it as leverage. It's here." Silence on the line. Then, "How do you know that?" "Because it's what I would do," she said. "Keep everything close when you're applying pressure. Don't let the thing you're using get out of arm's reach." She looked at Sal. "Does he have any floors in this building?" Sal was already on his phone. He talked to someone fast in the particular compressed shorthand of people who had been relaying information under pressure for a long time, and then he looked at her. "4th and 5th, he said. "He keeps a suite, private offices." She relayed it. "Claire," Damien said, and his voice had a new quality, not the compression from before, but something more direct. "I need you to tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking that if the package doesn't exist, the leverage doesn't exist." She kept her voice level. "And if the leverage doesn't exist, you can walk out of that room. Getting to the 4th floor of a building Victor Kane is currently occupying is not—" "I know what it is," she said. "Give me 30 minutes. "Claire." 30 minutes, she said. "Keep them talking. Ask Victor questions. Make him explain himself. Men like him enjoy explaining themselves. You know that." Another pause, shorter this time. "He does," Damien admitted. "Then use it." She looked at Sal. "I need you to stay on with him. Keep that line open." Sal took his phone back, kept it to his ear. His expression had moved through several things and settled somewhere between impressed and alarmed, which was a reasonable place to be. She got out of the car. She didn't run. Running was noise, was attention, was exactly the wrong thing when you needed to move through a space without becoming part of it. She walked with the same quality of motion she'd used in the hotel lobby, deliberate without being purposeful, visible without being notable. A woman walking toward a building at a reasonable pace on a Friday evening. She thought about what she knew. The building had a lobby, public access through the front, and almost certainly a service entrance. Victor's people would be watching the front. The service entrance was less glamorous, and therefore, in her experience, substantially less watched. Not because people were careless, but because attention flowed naturally toward the obvious. She went around the back. The service entrance had one man. Young, standing with the slightly unfocused attention of someone who'd been posted to a location where nothing was expected to happen. She walked toward him at the same easy pace, and when he looked up, she gave him the look, the one that was simultaneously warm and completely certain. The look that said, "I belong here, and you and I both know it," and said, "Evening, I'm with the medical team. Someone reported a cardiac concern on 4. He looked at her. She was in her street clothes, not scrubs, which was a problem, except that she kept her hospital ID clipped to her jacket pocket. Force of habit, never remembered to take it off, and she touched it now, without making it a gesture, just made sure it caught the light the right way. "Nobody called," he started. "They called the hospital directly," she said. "Is there an elevator, or should I take the stairs?" "I'd rather take the stairs. Honestly, elevators slow everything down." He blinked. The stairwell door was behind him and slightly to his left. He was deciding. She waited with complete patience, the way she waited for labs to come back when she already knew what they were going to say. He stepped aside. "Thank you," she said, and went through the door. The stairs were 2 flights. She took them without hurrying, listening for movement above and below, hearing nothing that concerned her. Her heart was doing something faster than usual, but her hands were steady. They were always steady, and she used the 20 seconds of climbing to finish the diagram. 4th floor. Victor's private offices. He would have people at minimum 2, probably 3. The package itself would be on a device, or in physical form, or both. What she needed was not the package itself exactly. She needed confirmation of what was in it. Something specific enough that her contact could treat it as concrete intelligence rather than second-hand inference. She needed, ideally, Victor Kane not to know she'd been here until after she'd gotten what she needed. She opened the stairwell door on 4. The hallway was empty. She listened. 2 voices, male from behind a door at the far end. Casual, not alert, the sound of men standing a watch. They didn't expect to be eventful. From a room closer, a different voice controlled, deliberate, the sound of someone on a phone call he was managing. "Victor." She went toward the closer voice. The door was not fully closed. She stopped beside it and listened, because she'd learned a long time ago that 3 minutes of listening was worth a great deal more than 3 minutes of action, and what she heard in those 3 minutes changed the shape of everything. Victor Kane was not talking to someone about the meeting. He was talking to someone about a timeline. He said a name she recognized from her contact's briefing, one of the operation designations, the one she'd been told had 3 active personnel attached to it. He said it with the casual familiarity of someone who had not just read a file name, but had worked out what the file name meant. He said it, and then he said a location, a city, a date that was 9 days from today. Her contact needed to hear this. She had her phone out, and she was recording before she'd made the conscious decision to record, because her body did things before her brain caught up when the thing her body was doing was obviously correct. She held the phone near the door gap, and she listened, and she let it listen, and Victor Kane talked for another 4 minutes about the timeline, about the deployment, about what happened after the personnel were burned. I wasn't planning to sell the information. He was planning to use it directly in 9 days to expose 3 undercover operatives as part of a larger move that would simultaneously compromise the federal prosecutor's case and prove to every remaining power player in Chicago that Victor Kane could reach into things that were supposed to be unreachable. It was not leverage. It was a detonation device. She sent the recording to her contact before she'd taken 3 steps back from the door with a text that said, 9 days. Active deployment. This is concrete. Then she went back to the stairwell. The stairwell was not empty. The man on the stairs was not the man from the service entrance. He was older, more deliberate in the way he'd positioned himself, and his expression, when he saw her, was not the uncertain attention of someone caught off guard. He'd been waiting, which meant Victor had known she was in the building longer than she'd given him credit for, and the man at the service entrance had not been a victory, but a door that had been opened for her. She stopped on the landing above him. He said, "Mr. Kane would like to speak with you." She looked at him. She looked at the door to her left, 4th floor, Victor's people behind it. She looked at the stairs above, 5th floor, unknown. She ran the diagram in the 3 seconds she had. "Of course," she said, and came down the stairs toward him without hesitation, which was not what he expected. And while he was processing her compliance, she was processing his position and what it gave her. And when she was 2 steps above him, she stepped to the right and moved past him with the same economy she'd used in the hotel lobby, not running, not fighting, just moving in the space he hadn't thought to cover because he'd expected her to hesitate. She was past him before he'd fully turned. She took the next flight up, not down, because down was where he'd expect, and up was where she had 4 seconds of advantage. And at the 5th floor landing, she went through the door and pulled her phone out and called Damien. He picked up in 1 ring. "I need you to end the meeting," she said. "Right now. Tell Victor you need air. Tell him anything. Get out of that room and go down to the lobby and out the front door." "What happened?" "I have the recording. My contact is already processing it. Victor is 9 days from a full deployment, not leverage, actual exposure of active personnel." She was moving down the hallway, assessing. He was never going to use your agreement as a condition for stopping. He was going to get your agreement and then deploy anyway. The meeting was to keep you contained while his people moved into position. A beat of silence. "He used me as a distraction," Damien said. Flat. Something underneath it that was not anger exactly, but was the ancestor of anger. "He tried to," she said. "Damien, the lobby, now. I have 3 of his men in the room with me. They're not going to stop you walking out a door. They're not authorized for that if you're compliant. If you agree to the deal right now, he thinks he has what he needs. The compliance keeps you cooperative long enough for the timeline to run." She stopped at a window, looked out, oriented herself. "If you agree, just the words, just enough to walk out, you're not bound by it." "I don't agree to things I intend to break," he said. She felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have time to examine. "Then tell them you need to consult with someone. Tell them you need an hour. Walk out the door." Silence. 4 seconds. "There's a man in the stairwell," he said, "between my floor and the lobby." "I may have created that problem," she said. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," he said. And something in his voice was different. Not the compression from before, something more open, something that came from a different place. "Can you get to the lobby before me?" "If I move now." "Move now," he said. She moved. The 5th floor had a secondary staircase at the far end. She'd spotted the exit sign when she'd come through the door, and she took it, and it led out on the 2nd floor. And the 2nd floor had an elevator bank, and she took the elevator because the stairs were compromised. And sometimes the obvious choice was obvious for good reasons. The lobby was open and ordinary, and she walked through it and out the front door and stood on the sidewalk with her heart doing the fast, hard thing and her hands completely still. Sal's car was across the street. He'd moved it. She got in. "He's coming out," she said. "I know," Sal said. "He told me." He looked at her. His face was doing the complicated thing again, the thing that moved between impressed and alarmed, and had now added something that might have been something warmer. "You went in." "I went in," she confirmed. "By yourself." "There wasn't time to assemble a committee," she said. Sal looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head in a way that wasn't negative, more like a man adjusting to information that didn't fit his existing categories. "My daughter-in-law," he said, "definitely cannot do this." The building doors opened, and Damien walked out. He came across the street without rushing, got in the back of the car, and the door hadn't fully closed before he looked at her with the full weight of his attention. She handed him her phone. The recording was cued. He listened to 45 seconds of it, then stopped it. His jaw was doing something tight and controlled. 9 days, he said. "My contact is moving the relocation order now. She has enough to escalate." She looked at him. "Victor's going to know I was in that building within the hour." "I know." "Which changes your timeline." "It changes several things," he said. He looked at her steadily. "Are you all right?" The question landed unexpectedly, not because it was surprising that he asked it, but because of how he asked it. Not, "Are you functional? Are you operational? Did you get compromised?" Just, "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. "You went into a building controlled by Victor Kane," he said. "Alone, without backup, after he'd already demonstrated that he knew you were watching." "I had 45 minutes and a clear objective," she said. "I worked with worse conditions." "I know you did." He looked at her, and she saw in his face something that she recognized because she'd felt it herself. The particular unwelcome sensation of being afraid for someone else. The kind of fear that was worse than ordinary fear, because you had no control over its object. "That doesn't make me less concerned." She held his eyes. "The 3 personnel are going to make it out," she said. "Because I went in." "I know." "Then it was worth it." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not arguing with the outcome. I'm telling you." He stopped, started again differently. "I'm telling you that when Sal told me you'd gone into the building, there was about 30 seconds where I had difficulty thinking about anything else." The car was quiet. Sal, she noticed, was driving with the focused attention of a man who was not listening to the conversation in the back seat, which meant he absolutely was. "You barely know me," she said. "I know enough," Damien said. Simple, no performance in it. She looked at the city going past outside. She thought about the text Victor had sent her. Ask yourself if you really know what you walked into. And she thought about Sal in the coffee shop, saying he didn't want you to think he was using you. And she thought about the 30 months of her life that the file described, but couldn't explain the weight of all those decisions. The faces of the people she'd gotten out, and the faces of the ones she hadn't, and how she'd spent 4 years trying to put enough distance between herself and all of it to breathe. Victor's not finished, she said. No, Damien agreed. He's going to move faster now. He knows the recording exists and that my contact has it. He's going to try to get ahead of the relocation. 7 days instead of 9, Damien said. Probably less. She nodded. We need to find what else he has. Not just my file, the prosecutor, the council member. If he deploys everything at once, he causes enough chaos that no single agency can respond coherently, Damien said. I know. I've been thinking about it since I was sitting in that room listening to him explain himself. She looked at him. What did he say? He said that the difference between a powerful man and a temporary one was the ability to make himself necessary. His voice was level. He said he'd spent 15 years making himself impossible to remove, and that the last piece was making himself impossible to prosecute. A pause. He mentioned you specifically. He said a woman who could walk into a combat zone and keep her hand steady was either an asset or a problem, and that I had 48 hours to decide which I thought she was. She sat with that for a moment. What did you tell him? Damien looked at her. I told him she'd already decided that for herself, he said, and that I didn't make that category of decision for the people around me. She felt something move in her chest again, that same displacement she'd noticed before, and still didn't have a name for. He didn't like that answer, she said. No, Damien said. He didn't. Her phone buzzed. Her contact. She read the text. Read it again. The relocation order cleared, she said. All 3 personnel. They're moving within the hour. Sal exhaled from the front seat, a sound that had relief in it, and didn't try to hide the fact. Damien looked at her. Something in his face had changed, not dramatically, not the way faces changed in films when the big moment arrived. Just quietly, like a door that had been standing slightly open, had been opened a little more. You did that, he said. We did that, she said. He shook his head once. I sat in a room and performed compliance, he said. You went into the building. You kept 3 men occupied for 45 minutes while I worked, she said. I've had worse backup. Sal made a sound in the front seat. What? She said. Nothing, Sal said in the tone of a man who had quite a lot to say and was exercising restraint. Her phone buzzed again. Different number this time, not her contact. She looked at it. Victor Kane. Not a text. A call. She looked at Damien. He looked at the phone. His expression said your decision. She answered it. That was impressive, Victor said. His voice was exactly what she'd expected, controlled smooth, carrying the particular warmth of someone who had trained himself to sound reasonable under all conditions. I underestimated you. I don't do that often. Is there something you need? She said. I need you to understand something, he said. The recording you took, yes, I know about it, doesn't end this. It changes it. I've been building this for 8 years, Claire. A recording of me discussing a timeline doesn't dismantle 8 years. It moves 3 people to safety, she said. That was the objective. For today, he said. But I'm still here, and you're still standing next to a man who... I'm going to stop you there, she said. Because whatever you're about to say about Damien Russo, I want you to know, I've heard the version that comes from people who want to use it, and I've spent time looking at what's actually in front of me. Those are 2 different things. A pause. Short. You're making a choice, Victor said. I make my own choices, she said. That's been true for a long time. Then make sure you make them with accurate information, he said. Ask him what happened to the last person who stood where you're standing. The line went dead. The car was quiet. She lowered the phone. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. She looked at Damien, and she asked, Ask him what happened to the last person who stood where you're standing. She said it exactly the way Victor had said it. Not as an accusation, not with heat, just as a question that needed an answer. She owed herself that much. She'd spent 4 years learning to ask the questions she was afraid of instead of building walls around them. Damien looked at her for a long moment. She watched his face do the thing it did when he was actually thinking, not the performance of consideration, but the real kind. The kind that came from someone deciding what truth to tell and how much of it. Her name was Elena, he said. She was a lawyer. She worked inside my organization for 2 years, and she was feeding information to a federal task force the entire time. Claire kept her eyes on him. What happened to her? She was relocated, he said, by the task force. When her cover was about to break, they pulled her and put her somewhere safe. He paused. The something that Victor wants you to believe happened is not what happened. She's alive. She has a different name in a different city, and she runs a pro bono practice, and as far as I know, she's doing well. But she's gone, Claire said. She's gone, he confirmed. Because she made a choice about what side she was on, and when the consequences of that choice arrived, the people she'd been working for protected her. He held her eyes steadily. Victor wants you to believe I hurt her. He wants you to believe that anyone who gets close to me pays for it with something permanent. Didn't she? Claire said. Pay for it. I was quiet for a moment. She gave up 2 years of her life living inside something she'd built to destroy, he said. Whether that's a cost or a choice depends on how you look at it. A beat. She'd probably say it was both. Claire looked at the city going past outside the window. She ran the shape of what he'd told her against what she'd been watching for the last 4 days, and she found that it fit not because she wanted it to, but because it did. Victor told you that story so that you'd ask me, Damien said, and I'd either lie to you or tell you a version that made me look a certain way. He's good at engineering the questions that make people doubt what they're actually seeing. But you told me the real version, she said. I told you the real version, he said. What you do with it is your decision. Sal said nothing from the front seat. The city moved. Her phone was still in her hand, Victor's number still on the screen, and she looked at it, and then she put the phone in her pocket. He's going to move, she said. Not in 7 days, sooner. The recording changes his timeline. He knows we know what he had planned, which means his advantage was the planning, and the planning is compromised. Tonight or tomorrow, Damien said. Tonight, she said. He's that kind of man. He'd rather move immediately with less certainty than wait with a compromised plan. She looked at Damien. What does he have left? If the 3 personnel are relocated, and my contact has the recording, what's left in the package that still has teeth? Damien was quiet for 2 seconds. The federal prosecutor, he said. Martin Reyes. 14 months of casework. Victor has something on Reyes directly, not the case Reyes himself. Something personal that would require Reyes to either recuse himself from the case or be publicly destroyed. What is it? I don't know specifically. His voice tightened fractionally. I know it exists because Victor mentioned it in the meeting. He said it as an aside, the kind of A-side people use when they want you to know they have something without telling you what it is. He was showing you the depth of the water, she said. Yes, she thought. Reyes needs to know tonight. If we contact Reyes directly, not us, she said. My contact, she has the channel. If Reyes knows Victor has something on him, he can get ahead of it. Disclosure, recusal on his own terms, or he gives the case to a colleague and removes himself as a target before Victor deploys. She was already pulling her phone back out. Victor's leverage only works if it's a surprise. If Reyes walks into the next hearing having already disclosed whatever it is, then Victor has nothing, Damien said. He has noise, she said, which is different. She called her contact. It rang twice. I was going to call you, the voice said. Reyes, Claire said. Victor has something on him personally. We don't know what. He needs to know tonight, right now, so he can move before Victor does. A pause. How certain are you on the timing? Victor just called me directly, she said. He's positioning. He doesn't position unless he's about to move. All right, her contact said. The exhaustion in her voice had shifted to something operational. I can reach Reyes. It'll take 20 minutes. You have 10, Claire said. Tell him whatever you need to tell him about the source. I don't care. Understood. The line closed. Sal pulled the car to the side of the road without being asked. He turned off the engine and sat in the specific stillness of a man who understood that the next few minutes were going to determine several things, and that driving during them was the wrong use of resources. Damien looked at her. You know there's a version of tonight where Victor moves before we can close this. I know, she said. And you know that if that happens, the case against him likely dies, and the 3 personnel, even relocated, could still be at risk for months. I know that too, she said. I also know that we've done everything that can be done with what we have, which is the only variable that's actually inside our control. She met his eyes. The rest is the rest. You manage what you can, and you live with what you can't. I learned that a long time ago, and it took me a long time to actually believe it. He looked at her. In the quiet of the car with Sal's stillness in the front, and the city paused around them. She saw his face without the professional surface, the part underneath that he kept covered, not out of vanity, but out of the habit of a man who'd learned that showing what things cost you was a liability. What she saw underneath it was tired. Not weak. Nothing about Damien Russo was weak. But tired the way people were tired when they'd been running a long race and had gotten good enough at running it that they'd forgotten to ask themselves why they were running, or whether the destination was still what they'd thought it was when they started. She recognized it because she'd been wearing that same tired for 4 years. Victor said something else in that meeting, Damien said, before he left the room. She waited. He said that the difference between the two of us was that he'd never made the mistake of needing anyone. His voice was even. He said it like it was a strength. It's not, she said. No. Damien agreed. It's not. He looked at the window, then back at her. My father used to say that the problem with building walls high enough to keep everything out was that you eventually ran out of room to move inside them. A pause. I thought for a long time he was talking about the business. How wasn't, she said. No, Damien said. He wasn't. Her phone rang. Her contact. She answered immediately. Reyes has been reached, the voice said. He's filing a voluntary disclosure in the morning. Whatever Victor has on him, Reyes is getting ahead of it. His words were, a brief pause. I was wondering when this would surface. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second. The case stays. The case stays. He's transferring primary to his deputy, which insulates it from any challenge based on his personal situation, and the evidence package is being duplicated and placed with 2 additional agencies tonight. The voice paused. You moved fast. Victor moves faster, Claire said. Did we beat him? Reyes made the call 11 minutes before Victor's attorney contacted the court, requesting an emergency disclosure hearing for tomorrow morning. A pause that had something in it she hadn't heard from this woman before, which was something that might have been genuine. Yes, Claire, you beat him. She lowered the phone. Sal turned around in the front seat and looked at her. His face was doing something uncomplicated and human. Well, he said. The case holds, she said. Sal put both hands over his face and made a sound that was not words. Damien was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a clean name for something built from several things at once. Relief and something older and less nameable underneath it. Reyes got there first, she said. Victor's attorney tried to file 11 minutes after Reyes had already disclosed. The leverage is gone. He still has the port contract, Damien said. He still has the port contract, she agreed. But he has it without the infrastructure he needed to make it untouchable. Without the case collapsing, without the undercover personnel, burned, without personal leverage on the prosecutor. The contract is just a contract. Useful, but not a fortress. He'll rebuild, Damien said. People like Victor always rebuild, she said. But rebuilding takes time, and time is what the people working against him needed. She looked at him steadily. This was never about destroying him tonight. It was about stopping what he'd built from being deployed. We stopped it. Damien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What happens to you? What do you mean? Your file, your name. Victor still has it. He looked at her. He's going to be angry. Angry and methodical is when Victor Kane is most dangerous. She'd been thinking about this for the last 20 minutes, and she'd arrived at the same place she arrived at every time she thought about it, which was that the thing she'd been trying to protect, the quiet, contained, unremarkable life, was not the thing she thought she'd been protecting. She'd been protecting distance. From everything. From her own history, from connection, from the risk of mattering to people and having them matter back. She'd built the ordinary life as a kind of armor, and she'd told herself it was peace when it was actually just the managed absence of everything that had ever hurt. "He can have the file," she said. Damien looked at her. "Claire, I mean that." She looked back at him steadily. "The file says what I did. It doesn't say who I am. Victor can distribute it, publish it, put it on a billboard on Michigan Avenue. What he can't do is use my past against me if I'm not running from it." She paused. "I've been running from it for 4 years. I'm done running." The car was very quiet. Sal had gone completely still in the front seat. "What does that mean?" Damien said. "Specifically." "It means I'm going back to work on Monday," she said. "At the hospital. Because that's what I do, and I'm good at it, and I'm not going to let Victor Kane take that from me." She held his eyes. "And it means I'm done pretending that everything that happened this week was an accident I accidentally walked into." "It was an accident," he said. "You came in out of the rain." "I came in out of the rain," she agreed. "And I stayed." The weight of that landed between them, and neither of them moved away from it. "I don't know what this looks like," she said. "Your world and mine. I'm not going to pretend I've mapped it." "I haven't mapped it either," he said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I know that I've been more myself in the last 4 days than I've been in 4 years," she said. "And I think you have too, even though you'll probably express that differently." Something crossed his face. "More precisely," he said, "I'd say that I've spent approximately 4 days being surprised by someone, which is not something that happens frequently, and I've found that I don't want it to stop." "That's more precise," she agreed. Sal cleared his throat. It was the most deliberate performative throat clearing she had ever witnessed. Both of them looked at him. "I'm just going to say," Sal said carefully, "that this is the second time in 22 years Damien has explained himself, and the first time resulted in a decision he has never regretted." He paused. "That's all I'm going to say." "Sal," Damien said. "I'm done," Sal said. "Finished. Completely." Claire looked at Sal for a moment. Then she looked at Damien. "Did the first time involve a woman?" "No," Damien said. "A man. A dog," he said after a pause that was exactly long enough to be honest. "He found a dog. In a situation. He wanted to keep it." Sal from the front said, "His name is Bruno, and he is extremely well adjusted." She felt something open in her chest, not the displacement from before. Something cleaner and warmer and less alarmed. Something she didn't try to name because naming it too early was how people scared it away. She laughed. A real one. The kind that came from a place she hadn't visited in a while. Damien watched her laugh with an expression on his face that she thought, if she was reading it correctly, was the expression of a man seeing something he hadn't expected and finding it more important than he was prepared for. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Victor Kane. A text this time. It said, "This isn't finished." She read it, showed it to Damien. He read it. "No," he said. "It's not. But tonight is finished," she said. "Tonight is finished," he agreed. She typed back to Victor, "I know. We'll be ready." She sent it. Then she put the phone in her pocket and looked at Damien and said, "I need to eat something. Real food. Not crisis food." "Sal's wife," Sal said immediately from the front seat. "We're not going to your wife's house at 11 p.m., Damien said. "She would love it," Sal said. "She made extra. She always makes extra. She has been making extra for 22 years, on the theory that I'll eventually bring someone interesting home, and she is not wrong." Claire looked at Damien. Damien looked at the ceiling of the car in the manner of a man requesting patience from a universe that was not providing it. "Call her," Claire said to Sal. "Absolutely not. Damien said. At the same moment Sal said, "Already dialing." They went to Sal's wife's house. Her name was Rita, and she was exactly what Sal had somehow conveyed without describing: small and warm and completely unimpressed by anything, including the fact that her husband had arrived at 11 p.m. on a Friday with the most dangerous man in Chicago, and a woman. Rita immediately identified with the particular accuracy of someone who had lived alongside difficult things and learned to read them as someone who had been through enough to know what she was worth. Rita fed them. It was late, and it was warm, and the food was real, and the table had the quality of a table that had held a lot of conversations. Rita asked Claire what she did, and Claire said ER nurse, and Rita said her sister had been a nurse for 30 years, and that it was a calling and not a job. And Claire said yes, that was exactly right, and something in her settled. Damien sat at a table in someone's home and ate food that someone had made because they made extra on the chance that it would be needed. And he looked, Claire thought, like someone who had forgotten that this kind of thing existed and was in the process of remembering. Later in the car going home, her home, which Sal drove to without being told the address, which she chose not to examine, she sat beside Damien in the back seat, and they were quiet, in the way they'd been quiet in other cars and other rooms. The comfortable kind of quiet that didn't need filling. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Ask." "The 30 months the file describes," he said carefully. "The things you did. Are you at peace with them?" She thought about the honest answer. "No," she said. "Not all of them. Some of them I'll be thinking about until I'm very old." She paused. "But I'm at peace with who I was when I made them. I did what I could with what I had, and I tried to save more than I lost, and most days I think I did." She looked at him. "Is that enough?" "I think it's all any of us get," he said. She looked at him. "Are you at peace with yours?" I was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I'm working on it," he said. "More than I was last week." She looked out the window. "That's enough," she said. The car stopped outside her building. Sal looked at the building and then looked straight ahead with the focused discretion of a man who had learned exactly when to become scenery. Damien walked her to the door, not because she needed it, not because the street was unsafe, but because it was a thing people did when they weren't ready for a night to be over, and this was the shape that took. At the door she turned around. "Victor said this isn't finished," she said. "It's not," he agreed. "There'll be more." "There'll be more," he said. "There's always more." She looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He looked back at her. "I know," he said. "Neither am I." She thought about what Sal had said in the car. He didn't want you to think he was using you. She thought about the way he'd held exactly where she'd put his hands when she'd been working on Marco. No questions, no hesitation, exactly the right pressure. She thought about him sitting in a room with 3 of Victor's men while she'd gone into the building, trusting her to do the thing she'd said she was going to do without sending anyone after her. She thought about the fact that she'd trusted him to stay in that room for 45 minutes, and he had. "I'll be at the hospital Monday," she said. "And after my shift, I'll be reachable." "Monday," he said. "After your shift." "Don't make it a thing." "I would never," he said in the tone of a man making it a thing. She almost smiled. She went inside. She climbed to her apartment and changed and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and let the whole week move through her. The rain, the revolving door, the old man in the navy blazer, Anya on the floor with compressed breathing, Marco and the fragment that wasn't a graze, the stairwell in Victor's building, Rita's table, and the food that had been kept warm just in case. She thought about the text Victor had sent. "This isn't finished." No, it wasn't. Victor Kane was still out there, still building, still convinced that the difference between a powerful man and a temporary one was the ability to make himself necessary by making everyone else afraid. He would come back in a different shape, with different tools, and she would need to be ready for that, and so would Damien, and so would the world that was still imperfectly and stubbornly trying to hold him accountable. But tonight, the 3 personnel were safe. Tonight Martin Reyes had gotten ahead of the leverage, and the case was intact. Tonight, Victor Kane had reached the end of 8 years of building and found that the last piece didn't fit because the people he'd tried to use had refused to be used, and the woman he'd tried to scare had walked into his building anyway and taken what she came for, and the man he'd tried to buy had sat in a room and waited with the particular patience of someone who trusted the person working on his behalf. She lay down. For the first time in 4 years, the weight she carried didn't feel like something she was fighting. It felt like something that had shaped her into a person who could do what needed to be done. When the moment came, the lobby, the stairwell, the table at Rita's house, the door where she'd turned around and said, "I'm not going anywhere." All of it, every wound and every decision and every face she still saw in the dark, had made her exactly the person who had walked into that hotel out of the rain on a Wednesday night and stayed. She closed her eyes. She slept. And on Monday morning, Claire Donovan walked back into the hospital where she worked and took the chart the resident handed her and looked at the case and started doing what she did. Saving lives one at a time with steady hands and a mind that didn't flinch and a heart that had finally stopped running from its own history. She was not just a nurse. She was not just a soldier. She was not just a survivor. She was Claire, the woman who walked into the fire, not because she had nothing to lose, but because she had finally decided that what she stood to gain was worth every risk it cost her to stand there. And that, in the end, was the kind of woman that no file, no leverage, and no man like Victor Kane could ever reduce to something manageable. She was exactly who she had chosen to be, and she was just getting started.